Imagine this. It's a quiet night, August 21st, 1986, in a remote part of Cameroon. In the villages that surround a crater lake called Nyos, a silent, invisible killer suddenly sweeps through the valleys. There's no warning, no big explosion, just a sudden, deadly stillness. All right, let's unravel this incredible scientific detective story.
You know, the few people who actually survived told these chillingly similar stories. Right before they blacked out, they remembered a strange smell, maybe a feeling of warmth, and then just nothing. They'd wake up hours, sometimes even a full day later, to a scene that was just unimaginable.
When help from the outside world finally made it to the area, the scale of the tragedy was just staggering. We're talking about more than 1,700 people who had died, in their sleep, in their homes, or even as they were trying to run.
And it wasn't just the people. Something like 3,000 cattle also died, just lying lifeless in the fields. It was like some kind of silent, indiscriminate plague. It just wiped the area clean.
A disaster this huge without an obvious cause. I mean, no earthquake, no fire, no big storm. It was completely unheard of. So for the international team of scientists that rushed to the scene, the #1 question was, what on earth happened here?
When the investigators got there, everything was eerily calm. The air was clear, but the evidence of some powerful and really bizarre event was absolutely everywhere. The mystery of Lake Nyos was only just getting started, and the clues were, well, they were deeply strange.
So the investigation kicked off right at the source, the lake itself, and what the scientists found there only made the puzzle more confusing. They were looking at a series of baffling clues that justified any simple explanation.
The clues they were finding just didn't add up. For one, the lake had turned from its normal blue to this weird rusty red. There was evidence that a huge wave, we're talking 25 meters, that's over 80 feet high, had crashed ashore. And apparently a geyser of water had shot almost 300 feet into the air. But, and this is the crazy part, the water was cool. How do you get a violent eruption without any heat? Even weirder, while people and animals were dead, all the surrounding plants were perfectly fine. Okay, with all this weird physical evidence in hand, the investigators turned their attention to the killer itself. Whatever this thing was, it was invisible, it was heavier than air, and it was absolutely lethal. It was time to start going through the suspects.
So the first theory seemed like a total slam dunk. Lake Nyos is sitting in a volcanic crater. You've got a violent water surge, strange smells. It had all the markings of a classic volcanic eruption releasing toxic gases from underground.
But the evidence just didn't line up. At all. A volcanic event would have superheated the lake, but the water in Nyos was cool. Volcanic gas is also full of stuff like sulfur and chlorine, you know, that really sharp, acrid smell, but tests of the water showed those chemicals were basically missing. The prime suspect had a rock-solid alibi.
So if it wasn't your typical volcanic gas, what was it? Well, when scientists finally analyzed water samples from the very bottom of the lake, they found their killer. The water was absolutely saturated with a shocking amount of carbon dioxide. It made up more than 98% of all the dissolved gas. CO2 is odorless, colorless, and in high concentrations, it's a deadly asphyxiation. So the case of what killed everyone was cracked, but that just opened up a brand new question. Where did an entire lake's worth of CO2 even come from? This wasn't something that could be explained by, rotting plants at the bottom. The source had to be much bigger.
The answer, it turns out, lies deep inside the Earth. The CO2 was what's called magmatic gas. Now, this isn't gas from a big, violent eruption. You have to think of it more like a slow, steady leak from the planet's molten mantle that's been seeping up through deep cracks in the crust for thousands and thousands of years.
And it just so happens that Lake Nyos is sitting in the perfect spot for a leak like this. It's located right on what's known as the Cameroon volcanic line, which is basically a major fault zone that acts like a superhighway for this deep Earth gas to travel to the surface. Isotope analysis confirmed it too. The carbon in the gas was ancient, proving it came from the mantle, not from any kind of recent biological stuff happening in the lake. Okay, so we've got a slow, steady supply of what should be harmless CO2 seeping up from below. So how did the lake itself turn that gas into a weapon of mass destruction? The answer isn't in geology, but actually in the physics of deep tropical lakes.
The key idea here is something called lake stratification. See, unlike lakes in other parts of the world that mix their water up every year with the seasons, deep tropical lakes like Nyos are incredibly stable. The warm water on the surface stays on top, and the cold, dense water at the bottom stays right where it is. They pretty much never mix. And that stability is exactly how this gas bomb was built. For century after century, CO2 seeped into that bottom layer of Lake Nyos. The immense pressure from 200 meters of water sitting on top of it forced that gas to dissolve, just like the fizz in a soda bottle. And because those lake layers never mixed, the gas was trapped. It just kept accumulating year after year until the deep water was holding a truly colossal amount of dissolved gas.
Honestly, this is the best way to picture it. The lake had basically turned into a gigantic bottle of soda that had been left perfectly still for hundreds of years, with the cap on tight, just holding this incredible amount of pressure in its depths.
So we have our motive, that magmatic CO2, and we have the weapon, that stratified lake. But there's still one piece of the puzzle missing. After all those centuries of just quietly sitting there, what finally set the bomb off on that one specific night in August 1986? To put it another way, after all that time, what finally shook the soda bottle? What kind of disturbance was big enough to trigger such a catastrophic release?
The exact trigger is still something people debate, but the leading theory points to some kind of physical disturbance. Maybe a landslide from one of the steep crater walls just plunged into the lake, messing up the layers. Or it could have been an internal wave, or even just some unusually heavy rain. Whatever it was, it caused some of that deep, gas-rich water to rise just enough for the pressure to drop.
And that was all it took. The moment that gas started coming out of the water, it created a chain reaction, pulling more and more deep water up with it. The result was this catastrophic eruption of about 1.2 cubic kilometers of CO2 gas. And since CO2 is about 1.5 times denser than air, this invisible cloud didn't just float away. It hugged the ground, flowing over the crater rim and down into the valleys at speeds of up to 50 miles per hour, silently pushing all the oxygen out of the way and suffocating every living, breathing thing in its path. The horrifying discovery at Lake Nyos was a huge wake-up call for the whole world. It led scientists to identify two other potentially killer lakes, Lake Nyos, also in Cameroon, and Lake Kivu in Rwanda. And those lakes are now being carefully managed to let the gas out safely. But it leaves you with this chilling final thought, doesn't it? What other ticking time bombs might be hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the right trigger in the quiet depths of our world's lakes?